Okay, folks, we're going to look at Goodyng the Polymath one more time, this time looking at it through the lens of it being a study in waste. Yes, there are wasted opportunities in the book, and there are whole wasted pages in the book that make it really hard to believe that Mike Barron is really the one responsible for this finished product. And I have a theory about why Gooding turned out as bad as it did. I hope you will stick around to the end of the video where I explain what my theory is. So, we've got at the beginning of the book, Ron Hodges, the bully of the story, is calling Cato Gooding an egghead and punching him in the stomach. That attracts the attention of Gina Adams, who becomes a lifelong friend to Gooding. Now, this is their first meeting. This is their first encounter together. And they have a conversation on the way home from school. And the conversation goes like this. I went to junior high school with Ron. He's a creep and a bully. I'll take care of it. How? He's only going to step it up. I've seen him do it before. He made one boy switch schools. I'll appeal to his better nature. Oh, come on. Don't worry about it. I just need time to think about it. See you tomorrow. Okay. All right, one little piece of quibble about the dialogue here is you've got the phrase about it used twice in the same set of sentences. Let's get rid of the first instance so that Cato just says, don't worry, I just need time to think about it. See you tomorrow. But really, I want you to take a look at this entire segment of dialogue and realize that the whole conversation is about the bullying that just took place. Now, if you've just met somebody who may turn out to be a good friend, or somebody who has at least expressed enough interest in your well-being that you might want to have that person for a friend, how is it that you don't talk about anything else other than the bullying that just took place? You would think you would want to have some more basic information exchange than this. So I would rewrite this conversation into something more along the lines of the following. Cato, is that your real name or a nickname? Real. My dad's favorite author is Cato, first historian of Rome. The name fits, though. Why? Cato saw before anybody else that Rome needed to conquer Carthage. I'm the same way. I can see what's coming before anyone else. You didn't see Ron's fist coming. No, but I see what I need to do about it. Well, this is my house. I'm a couple streets over. See you tomorrow, Cato. Bye, Gina. Thanks for being my protective detail. Haha. All right, so now you've got a conversation that at least gets in a little bit into their personalities. It gets a little bit into, the reason for Cato Gooding's odd first name, and just basically getting us in mind to see that Cato's wheels are already turning about what he's going to do about Ron Hodges. Now, the next page in the book shows us that if Cato made any kind of appeal to Ron's better nature, it didn't work because you've got Ron punching Cato in the stomach again. And by the way, what is it about people getting punched in the stomach or in the chest and blood flying out of their nose and mouth? I mean, this is something that goes all the way back to ISOM number 1, but this doesn't happen unless you've actually lacerated or shredded something inside the person. Otherwise, you should not have blood flying from the person's nose or mouth. That only happens if you've punctured the guy's lung. If you've I mean, I'm no expert in anatomy, but this is not something I expect to see in any kind of just fist on chest, fist on stomach kind of activity here. Calm it down with the blood. But one of the things that this page even exists to establish is the fact that whatever appeal Cato made to Ron's better nature has obviously not worked. But one of the things I feel is a missed opportunity here is the fact that we never get to see what is the appeal to his better nature. Why? What does Cato say to Ron Hodges, and why doesn't it work? And what is Ron Hodges' beef with Cato to begin with? For example, you've got him saying, hey, egghead, which seems to imply that Ron is resentful of Cato's intelligence. But Ron appears to be an intelligent kid, too, just from the fact that he's in one of Cato's classes. These classes, if you're a fast-tracked kid like Cato is, these classes have a tendency to be gifted classes. And so, is Ron a gifted child just like Cato is? And if so, then why would he be criticizing Cato on account of his intelligence? Is the problem that Cato is more intelligent than Ron, and Ron realizes it and feels threatened on that account? We never really get into the interplay here, and it's regrettable. And it does seem to follow from what Mike Barron says about Ron's future that he is intelligent because he's supposed to wind up becoming a master criminal in the future, although I don't see really any evidence of his displaying any master criminal attributes in this book. But if he's going to be a master criminal, you would think that he has to be excuse me, intelligent enough to be a master criminal. So it would have been interesting to know just what is the basis for Ron's resentment of Cato. It's not just some, malevolent streak. Maybe it's something deeper than that Cato's going to call out at a later point. And indeed, when you get to the next page, it does seem like Cato is going to be calling that out, because after he goes home and he gets a row of thumbtacks and he staples that to himself, or not staples it to himself, but puts that under his shirt as padding and as a lure for Ron to punch him in the gut again. There's this exchange where the teacher asks a question about the concept of Potemkin things, and here is where it seems like Cato is calling Ron out. So the teacher asks, who knows what Potemkin means? Anyone? Anyone listening? Gooding? And note that Potemkin is misspelled, and you need quotes around Potemkin here. And Cato replies, sir, it's a metaphor that carries the ultimate purpose of providing an elaborate facade designed to hide an undesirable reality. And then he just quietly, holds his hand out as if to say, what do you think of that, Ron? And I don't even understand how that's supposed to be a call-out of some sort. Moreover, there's just the fact that Cato's got his back turned to the teacher. This really should have been framed a different way, where, Cato might have been looking over his shoulder at Ron, but facing the teacher. You're not going to turn your back on the teacher when giving the answer. I just don't feel like this is a sufficient call-out for Cato's purposes, because what he's wanting to do is get Ron to punch him today. So I would have written something like this. Who knows what Potemkin means? Anyone? Anyone listening? Gooding? Sir, the label refers to an elaborate construct that intended to conceal a harsh reality. For example, a young man might create a violent persona to conceal his latent homosexuality. And boom, right there goes the dynamite. I mean, there's no way that Ron is going to be able to resist that dig. That one's just obvious. And here's something that putting the dig in this way also helps the book. It makes this whole page unnecessary. Now we don't need to establish that there is a pattern of this bullying going on. All we need to know is that Ron hit him one time, Cato immediately thought up what he should do, and now he's calling the bully out. And so we get kind of a sense of Cato's intelligence here more sharply than we do when we realize that, well, he's just been letting Ron hit him over and over again. That doesn't seem very smart. So, of course, what happens is Ron does take the bait. He punches Gooding in the gut, but this time he shreds his hand. And I have to admire Ron's pain tolerance here. I mean, all he does is just look at his hand and be like, oh, okay, how did that happen? And yet, according to later in the book, more severe damage was done than is implied here. I mean, I don't know how much damage you can actually do by punching a bunch of thumbtacks, but in a later portion of the book, Ron actually says, well, I had to get a tetanus shot. I missed school. They held me back a year. They held you back a year over a hand injury? What the heck? I mean, there are people who break their hands, and I don't think they get held back a year on that account. I don't understand why he missed school for this. This doesn't really make any sense. I would get rid of this. This was like trying to make it seem more important that an event than it really was. But there's also this moment where Cato takes a photo of Ron in his distress, and I don't get this scene either, because it looks like he's taking a trophy, which is something like serial killers would do. I would feel more comfortable if this was a scene in which you had the other kids around taking pictures of Ron and laughing at him and, basically implying that they were going to post that on social media. But if Cato's doing it, then we obviously want to see what his social media plan for that is. I mean, is there some sort of humiliation that he exposed Ron to online that that we didn't get to see in the book? Because nothing is made of this. It just doesn't make any sense. So I would have gotten rid of this too. I would have had the other kids maybe taking a picture, or I would have just left it alone at that. Next, we see Cato giving his valedictorian speech, and his speech is a big jumble. Stoicism. Those of you who took Mrs. Wagner's philosophy class know that Stoicism is an ancient Greek philosophy that teaches the virtue of the highest good based on knowledge, to live in harmony with nature, to be indifferent to the vicissitudes of fortune, including pleasure and pain, the discipline of desire. What do we need in order to be fulfilled? The discipline of action. How do we engage the world around us? The discipline of assent. Can we learn to love our lives as they really are? Okay, what a freaking hodgepodge. And the way you can tell this is a hodgepodge is that the letterer didn't even know what to do with this mess. If you look at the way that the letterer divided this up into bubbles, the letterer actually took one of the couplets at the end and split it across two dialogue balloons. So yeah, the letterer didn't know what was going on. I'm sure the kids didn't know what was going on. None of the adults in the room know what's going on. This is just a bad speech. Part of the reason for that is it needs a rewrite of this portion because these are all different things that Stoicism teaches, and so they should be placed in a list. Stoicism is an ancient Greek philosophy that teaches us to seek virtue based on knowledge, to live in harmony with nature, and to be indifferent to the vicissitudes of fortune, including pleasure and pain. And then you've got this series of three couplets that talk about three primary disciplines of Stoicism, but we never actually get an introductory statement saying that these are three disciplines of Stoicism. So let's have an introductory statement saying that Stoicism promotes three primary disciplines of study, and then you can get into the couplets, and then the letterer will be able to properly separate the dialogue balloons. But honestly, we don't need this page at all. And why is that? Because it only communicates three useful pieces of information. Number one, Goodyng graduated as class valedictorian. Okay, that's point number one. Point number two, Goodyng subscribes to Stoicism. And point number three, Gina has remained with Goodyng throughout high school. All of this could have been communicated over the next couple of pages. In fact, the first 2 points could have been taken care of on the next page. You've got a conversation between Cato and Ross, who is the representative of Madwire Incorporated, who's basically giving him an offer saying, hey, I will cover your schooling in full up through your master's degree, and you don't have to pay for a dime of that, and you'll even get a stipend. So he's making Cato a very generous offer. Well, all you have to do is throw in a little bit of conversation with Ross that illuminates these 2 points, like, congratulations on graduating as valedictorian. I mean, there, you just removed the whole need for that stupid speech. And then Ross, this is a generous offer, yet you seem unfazed. And Cato replies, I'm a Stoic. I don't get fazed by the vicissitudes of fortune, good or bad. Okay, now we get our introduction to Stoicism and the fact that Cato subscribes to it. So all you needed is those couple of pieces of dialogue to communicate these 2 pieces of information. You don't need to go through that whole, fumbling speech. As for the third point about Gina having followed it or being around him all through high school, you do have this scene later in the book where you show Goodyng being driven to college, and then, right out of the blue, Gina shows up and meets him there. And he didn't expect to see her there, which is kind of weird because if they're friends, why on earth would he not know that she planned on going to the same college as him? It doesn't really make any sense, unless maybe they'd had some sort of falling out earlier or whatnot. It just kind of doesn't stick. This whole page does not stick the landing. It makes it seem too coincidental that they show up at the same place, even though there's a piece of dialogue where it's like, oh, no, this is not a happenstance, It's like, give me a freaking break. This is obviously contrived by the writer. So I would have rewritten this whole portion in the following way. Cato talks with Gina about the offer he's been made by Madwire. She's both happy for him and sorry to see him leave. He'll be attending a great college, and she secretly hoped she would be able to follow him wherever he went, but that college's tuition is way beyond her means. Cato tells her that one condition of his deal with Madwire was that they give Gina a full ride too. No strings attached. Despite his devotion to stoicism, he realizes that he needs her and loves her. She confesses that she's loved him all along too. And the great thing about setting up the page like this is that it eliminates the need for future pages that we get that are so low information as to be insulting. We get these pages where the basic gist is, hey, after studying, you want to go to a concert? I gotta go to a soup kitchen first. So they go to a soup kitchen. Random conversation with some homeless guy. Let's have a little more conversation, then let's go to the concert. And that's it. We don't need either of these pages now. We know that they're in love. We know that they are for each other. We don't need to have this like relationship developing crap. Same thing with the next couple of pages, where one of which you have Cato and Gina playing tennis with a couple, and there's no meaningful information exchanged on this page. This couple isn't anybody in particular. They're not special people. They ask him a minor question about his job, but he doesn't respond in any way that's meaningful. And then we see a restaurant scene in which Cato proposes to Gina and she accepts. Okay, we don't need either of these. Just show them getting married, which is what the next page shows. Just show them getting married, and we know that they've stuck together through college into getting married, and here they are, and he's working for the Madwire company now, and now he's going to start getting into his first business conflict. But those are 2 whole pages, 4 if you count the preceding 2, that we didn't need to show their relationship building up to this point that you were just going to give us anyway. So, in fact, let's go ahead and take a look at the total number of pages we've wasted so far. We've got the midpoint bullying scene. We didn't need that. We've got the valedictorian speech. We didn't need that. And then we've got 4 pages of relationship development that we didn't need. So we've got 6 pages of the book wasted so far. And this book is only 64 pages long. Now, 6 out of 64 pages, I mean, that's less than 10%. So that's not bad on the fluff scale. If 10% of your comic is fluff, you're not doing terribly at this point, but you really don't want to see it get above this, except it gets way above this. Because not only do we have to deal with Goodyng's future, we also have to deal with Ron Hodges' future. And we get that sent to us in a series of pages, where Ron goes to basic training, he makes a friend with a guy who he fights with, and then they bond over beer, and they go on a mission together, where they take on a bunch of terrorists, kill some terrorists, and steal some contraband. They then are convicted together in court of stealing the contraband, and they're made an offer to go work for a company called Procurement Incorporated. So they stage an escape, and they wind up in the hands of Procurement Incorporated, and they get to meet their leader, the procurement's leader, James Silk. Now, one minor quibble I have with this succession of pages is that there is a scene here where Ron hits his soon-to-be friend on the leg, and his friend says, a touch, I do confess. That's a quote from Shakespeare, and as a quote, it needs quote marks around it. Likewise, there are scenes where they put quote marks that aren't needed. Like in this scene, one of the things Rippaverse really needs to understand, because I've seen this in AlphaCore as well, when you have a dialogue balloon that points inside a structure, you do not put quote marks around the dialogue there. You understand that somebody is talking from within the building. The other thing that I notice on this particular page is that it's addressed to Ronald Hodges. The judge is solely addressing Ronald Hodges, but you've got both Ronald Hodges and his friend on trial, so they should be getting convicted together. And maybe that's not how it works in the real world. Maybe each person's sentence is read out individually, but this is one of those places where you can kind of take a liberty for the sake of entertainment. They do that all the time on these crime drama shows. I don't know if you ever noticed how there's a lot of Like on those serial profiler shows like Criminal Minds, there's a lot of handoff of conversation that would just never happen in the real world, or how people, end phone conversations without saying goodbye. There are certain liberties you can take in the entertainment world when you are doing a page, and putting both of these guys on trial together is something that you could reasonably do. So after the guys get out of prison and they're being picked up by the Procurement Incorporated representatives, they're asked for their names and birth dates, and they give their names and birth dates, but for some reason the birthdays are redacted, and that just pops me right out of the comic, because I'm like, why is there a redaction here? I mean, I can't believe that you're worried about actually matching some guy named Ronald Hodges' birthday. That doesn't make any sense. Or Eric Speece, like you're actually going to land on that guy's birthday. I mean, it's possible, but at the same time, even so, I mean, I don't know if name and birthday are sufficient to just get you anything. But these are obviously going to be made up numbers to anybody who's reading the book. I tend to think maybe the reason they redacted the birthdays is because these are comic book characters, and so you don't want to lock them down to a particular year or decade, so that they don't like age unnecessarily. But if you're going to do that, then you shouldn't ask them for their birthdays at all, because that just pops us out of the book and makes us think about the fact that these are comic book characters, and you don't want us to do that. You want us to be immersed in the book. You want us to be thinking about, what's going on in the book, and to be in that world. This just pops us out of that world. So really what should have been asked for here is the names and Texas military IDs, because it's easy to fake that kind of stuff up. One other thing I noticed is that there is a reluctance on Mike Baron's part to use emphasis. Like, for example, in this section of dialogue, the organization Procurement Incorporated really needs to be emphasized, because you need to know who are the major players in your book. You need to know what the villain organization is in your book. And so to highlight and emphasize Procurement Incorporated here would give the reader that impression. It would make that name stand out to the reader, so that anytime the reader encounters that later in the book, the reader can realize, oh, these are the bad guys. You have to do that at some points in there, because otherwise you're just letting the reader try to figure it all out for himself. And honestly, the reader doesn't need that kind of aggravation. Here's another example where you show dialogue going into a building, and it's got quote marks around it. You don't need the quote marks. And the head of Procurement Incorporated is named James Silk. Here's another example of a place where emphasis would be helpful. So this guy is James Silk. Now, I hope he does not have a doctorate. And the reason that I hope James Silk does not have a doctorate in anything is because there is already a character called Dr. Silk that exists in Valiant Comics. This is a long-standing character with Valiant Comics called Dr. Silk. His name is Dr. Augustus Silk in the comics, but we all know how tricky a trademark infringement can be. Just don't go there with making James Silk in the Rippaverse a doctor of any kind. So now let's hit the big question. Excuse me. Let's hit the big question here and ask ourselves, how many of these pages did we actually need? You're probably going to be shocked at this. We don't need any of these pages. We only need 3 out of these 10 pages to communicate the amount of story that is actually contained in these particular pages. The only thing that we really need to know is that after high school, Ron and a friend of his were convicted of stealing contraband. They were recruited by Procurement Incorporated, and then they went to go work for James Silk. And this scene where they meet with James Silk can actually be pushed to a later part of the book, because it includes the mission that they've been recruited for, and it'd be better to see this information given as part of the mission sequence in the book. So this should be the first page of the mission sequence, in which they find out what it is they've been hired to do. Then here is the lab that they've been instructed to take over. Their plane is coming in at the bottom. They leave the plane, and land outside of the lab. They blow the doors to the lab open. They shoot their way in. They find the scientists in the actual lab inside, and this is where Ron Hodges gets his powers. And then his friend has to revive him with CPR. After he successfully does that, they go outside and they make their way to the extraction point where there's a chopper waiting for them. So there's only one point that I kind of quibble with, and that is this point where Eric, who is Ron's friend, is trying to resuscitate Ron, and when Ron does revive, Eric says, "Thank you, Michibo." Not many people are going to know what Michibo is, and so it would have been nice to have an editor's note describing this. Mike Barron has done extensive research doing with Native American mythologies on account of his working on Turok Dinosaur Hunter for Valiant Comics back in the day. And so he would know, more than others, that Michibo is the name of the great rabbit spirit that is supposed to have created the earth in the Algonquin mythologies. That's not something that's really known to a lot of rank and file Americans, so it would have been nice to have like an editor's note saying, editor's note star, Michibo equals the great rabbit spirit that created the world, or God. So how many of these pages are actually necessary to tell the story? Well, there's a better ratio here. We're only really getting 2 pages of fluff in this sequence. We don't really need to see what's going on in the lab before Ron and Eric get there. In fact, it adds to the spookiness of the lab if we don't see what's happening in there before they arrive. Moreover, once they leave the compound to go to the extraction point, we don't need a blow-by-blow of them getting back to the chopper, especially a blow-by-blow in which for some reason Ron sprains his ankle, and it's like, okay, is there a reason you wanted to make it a 3-hour tour back to the chopper? And that doesn't make much sense. So those 2 pages could have been dropped altogether. So what is our page count now? How are we doing as far as wasted pages go? Well, we're up from 6, obviously, to now 15. 15 wasted pages so far. And we're not done yet. We've actually got another page coming up in which Goodyng is sparring with his martial arts instructor. But there's a mention on the next page of how he sprained his arm practicing martial arts. We don't actually need to see this blow by blow, so this is a wasted page. And then there's another wasted page in which he finds out that he is being targeted by Ron Hodges. He's already found this out, and now he's putting himself out in public so that Ron will know where to find him. Except we've already got a scene earlier in the book where Ron finds one of Gooding's employees, and kills him, and we're never concerned with how did Ron find that employee. So the idea that we should be concerned with how Ron finds Goodyng, that doesn't make any sense. He's got Procurement Incorporated working for him. We assume that they've got intelligence services. So this whole page is also fluff. So now we've got not just 15 pages, but 17 out of 64 pages are wasted in this book. And now we've gotten into dangerous territory, because that is over 25% of the book. You've got over 25% of a 64-page book is complete fluff. At that point, you have to call this a failure, because you want to have pages of substance as much as you possibly can. And to have only 3/4 of your book amount to that, that's ridiculous. Now, I've got some closing nitpicks to go through, so let's go ahead and hurry through those. When you see Ron Hodges testing out his powers for the first time, he uses his powers to speed up the heart rate of a dog and kill the dog. And that's, and then he adopts the name for himself of Splatterpuss. But if it's going to be Splatterpuss, don't you think he should have tested his powers out on a cat? I sure splattered that puss. It just follows. I don't know why they went with a dog instead of a cat here. Sorry, cat, but it should have been you. Then we have a scene where Ron descends from the air on a guy who has just sold some company secrets to a competitor. So this is a guy who's involved in shady stuff. And now, out of the blue sky, dark blue sky, here comes this guy floating down, holding out his hand for a handshake. And this guy doesn't take off running? Like that makes no sense whatsoever. You are not just going to have a guy float down in front of you and you're going to shake that guy's hand, especially if you have been involved in some shady crap that same evening. That guy is obviously there for you and not in a good way, and you're going to take off running. So this whole scene here is just not believable. Moreover, we see that Ron picks up the money that the guy took for his services, and then he floats off, leaving the guy on the ground and leaving a witness behind. So there is this child witness there in the scene, and I'm thinking, oh, okay, this is going to get interesting because obviously that child, when Ron realizes he left a child witness, he's going to have to go back and kill that child, etc., etc. That child never comes up again. The police go to Goodyng and they say, we found Mr. Robbins in an alley this morning stuffed inside a dumpster, bleeding from his eyes, nose, and mouth. And at that point, Goodyng's thinking the same thing that we are. What do you mean he found him in a dumpster? He was left on the sidewalk. Who stuffed him in a dumpster? And that's what Goodyng's saying. Who stuffed him in a dumpster? It's just ridiculous. Oh, jeez. And what happened to the kid? I mean, there's no report of an eyewitness to the crime? That's just crazy. Moreover, I want to take the writers and artists to task about providing these duplicate scenes in the book. Excuse me. You've got this scene in which the sheriff's office arrives at the Goodyng residence. They talk to Goodyng. They talk to Goodyng inside his house, and then they leave. Okay? You have another page later in the book. The sheriff's office arrives, they talk to Goodyng inside his house, and then they leave. Guys, I'm not paying to see duplicated pages. To see essentially duplicated pages. I mean, you practically could have photostatted the first page onto the second page, given the fact that the same thing basically happens in both pages. Same thing goes for these two scenes. You got a scene where Kato is asking to be shot because he wants to test out the quality of his armor. So he shoots himself with it, and he stands up to the armor, or he stands up to the bullet. And then there's a later scene in which Goodyng gets zapped by an energy ray, and he survives that as well. I mean, come on. Can you not think up two different experiments to see Goodyng put himself through or put something else through? This is so I hate seeing repetition in a comic. Here's a little dialogue snarl that gets even into the pronoun BS. I asked AI, who do I have to fear? They gave me a top 10. Okay, 3 problems with this. Let's go through them. I asked AI, comma, whom do I have to fear? It gave me a top 10. Please don't get into that pronoun BS. It's bad enough humans want them. And last but not least, we have this scene in which Goodyng gets punched harder than any human being deserves to get punched. He is thrown all the way up into the air. I don't know whether he's punched in the face or punched in the chest. I'm going to assume it's the chest because if that was actually in the face, that would have knocked his head clean off. He is wearing armor, though, so I can understand him surviving that kind of punch. What I cannot understand is him hopping off of the top mezzanine and landing all the way back where he came from, beyond where he came from, on the stage. Now, we've seen that suit take a bullet, and we've seen that suit take an energy blast. What we have not seen is that suit impart any kind of super strength to him, such that it would have enabled him to hop all the way from the mezzanine to the stage. You've got to show us something like that before we can assume it happens. In fact, why don't you take one of the 17 wasted pages in the book and show us that? That would be nice. Okay, now last and not least, I want to go over a closing theory I have. I have confidence that Mike Barron is not ultimately responsible for this mess of a book. And the reason I say that is because he's got so many years of experience on him that there's just no way that someone like Mike Barron could have produced a book this bad. There had to have been editorial interference, and I think I know what it was. And I'm calling this my Hobbit theory of Gooding the Polymath, because it goes back to when Peter Jackson took on adapting The Hobbit for the movies, and he realized that, of course, there's so much that goes on in The Hobbit, you would need at least 2 movies to cover it. But he soon found that it was impossible to cut out so much that all you needed was 2 movies. You had to have a third movie. But that introduced the problem of there being not enough in each movie. You wanted each movie to be roughly, 2 hours of content, and so in order to blow things up to the point where you could have that much content in each movie, you would have to introduce fluff, you would have to fluff up certain scenes that were previously shorter, or you would have to introduce new side plots altogether that had nothing to do with the original story. For example, this barrel run that the dwarves take to escape from the elves turns out into a humongous battle where all basically elves, dwarves, and orcs are all fighting. In the book, this is more of a quiet barrel ride down the river where all the barrels are sealed and nobody realizes that the dwarves are in there. But it's turned into a great action adventure spectacle in the movie because they needed to fill the movie with something. And then you've got this side plot that was never in the book of Evangeline Lilly's elf character falling in love with one of the dwarf characters. And, okay, I guess, maybe we wanted a woman in a prominent role in the movies, which is fine. But this is pure fluff. This is not something that actually needed to be in there other than to give more running time to the movie. In the same way, I think what happened on the Rippaverse side is that Rippaverse has these properties that they need people to write, and Mike Barron came along and said, hey, I hear Chuck Dixon wrote some stuff for you, and he profited from it. How about I write a story for you? And Rippaverse said, well, we've got this character Gooding. And Mike Barron said, say no more. Here's a 96-page script. And Rippaverse says, we're moving differently now. We only actually need a 64-page script. So now the question becomes, how do you adapt 96 pages into 64 pages? Well, maybe you take the Hobbit approach, and you say, all right, we're going to take this script, and instead of making one 64-page book out of it, we're going to make 2 64-page books out of it. But in order to be able to do that, you have to bloat up the original script into 128 pages. So you've got Rippaverse's incompetent editors, who don't know the first damn thing about how to tell a story, taking Mike Barron's script and bloating it up to 128 pages, which, by the way, is about 25% bloat. And now we've got Gooding 1, which became Gooding the Polymath, and then we've got a unreleased book called Gooding 2, who knows what that's going to be called, that will come out sometime later. The only problem with my theory, of course, is that we've never heard anything about a second Gooding book, but it's got to be out there. I cannot believe for a moment that Mike Barron wrote the script for Gooding the Polymath and left it in the place that he did. It doesn't make any sense, because the Gooding that you end up with at the end of Gooding the Polymath does not connect the dots to the Gooding we find in ISOM number 2. There's a lot more that has gone on in Gooding's life between those 2 points. And if somebody wants to tell me that no, it really is that, it's like, fine, tell me that. I'm just going to chalk it up to y'all being a bunch of shit writers and shit editors. So there's got to be a second book out there. And if I'm Mike Barron and I know that there's that second book out there, I would be telling people about it, because I certainly would not want my writing career to suffer because everybody thinks that I wrote an absolute piece of crap like Gooding the Polymath. I would want people to know that the people who are ultimately responsible for the garbage that Gooding the Polymath turned out to be are the Rippaverse editors who took my script and cut it in half and bloated it up until it was something practically unrecognizable to me. That is the story I'd be going with. Because otherwise, how in the hell is somebody supposed to read Goodyng the Polymath and then go hire Mike Baron to write a script for them? I mean, to me, that book is like a kiss of death for his work-for-hire career. I really don't believe he's responsible for how bad Goodyng the Polymath is. I mean, granted, there's stuff in there that maybe he had some ideas about going against trope that made the books kind of more boring than it had to be, but still, it can't be as bad as it actually turned out simply due to him. He's just too good a writer for that. And I know that the Rippaverse can take even something of him and screw it up to that degree. I have full confidence in their ability to just take a script by an experienced writer and screw it up to no end. So what is the overall score that I am giving to Goodyng the Polymath? On the scale that I have been grading all of the prior comics, it's a 10-point scale where 6 is kind of the threshold line for, do I really want to read another issue of this? My original first impression of Goodyng the Polymath was to give it a 0.5. Yeah, that bad. I've since revised my score upward to be a 1.0. And the reason I've done that is because I have to give credit to Will Conrad for doing such a good art job. I mean, even if there are points in the book that I disagree with writing-wise, he has done an able job of communicating the story all the way through. There are very few points, if any, in the book where I was just like, I don't understand what's going on here. And really, hats off to him for delivering a competently told story, even if the story wasn't all that good. Also, I have to give some credit due to the fact that I didn't have to go through a whole bunch of English language problems here. I mean, yeah, you had some quote mark issues, and yeah, there was that speech on stoicism that needed some rewriting. But for the most part, Mike Baron has a great command of the English language, and I don't have to go through and be correcting a lot of his dialogue and putting dealing with emphasis put in wrong places, dealing with commas or periods being used incorrectly, things like that. So I'm going to go ahead and give Goodyng a 1.0 out of 10. But dear God, this has been like the worst of all of the Rippaverse books so far. And it just boggles the mind, because when you've got somebody like Mike Baron in your corner, you don't expect this kind of final product. And if my theory is correct, it just goes to show that it's not all a matter of who are the people giving you the creative input. It's also who are the people who are packaging it and getting it out to the readers. Rippaverse is a bad company. It's just so bad, and I really wish at this point I went and I bought a bunch of shirts from them during their latest sale, not the $5 sale, but the sale before that, and now I'm wishing excuse me, now I'm wishing I could send them back, because I'm just embarrassed to wear their shirts at this point. That company is so bad. Oh God. So anyway. Yeah, Goodyng the Polymath, it is a study in waste. There is a significant amount of wasted opportunities, wasted pages, and at this point, I'm largely blaming the Rippaverse editors for that. I'm blaming them for the fact that they have bloated Mike Baron's original script up beyond what is acceptable, and I'm also blaming them for not letting us know that there is a second Goodyng book out there. There's got to be. There's got to be. If there's not, then I don't know what that says for Mike Baron and where his career is going from here. So if I were Mike Baron, I'd be getting out in front of this story and saying, yep, Rippaverse screwed me over in more ways than one. And that's all I got to say about that. Thank you very much for watching. Please do go vote in my community poll. I've got 3 items up for consideration. One of them is Shane Davis's Inglorious Rex. And then on top of that, we've got Liam Gray's Dino King. And last but not least is a book called Cargo by Andrew Rodriguez. And Cargo is a book that I've actually edited. So I've got some editorial input on that. I don't know how much of that input Andrew actually took, so I'm going to be going through the book again to see just how much of my advice he took, how much he didn't, where can the book still be improved on if we had another chance to give it a go round. So if you want to see something that I've actually had my hand in, then you can vote for Cargo in the poll. Otherwise, we've got Inglorious Rex and Dino King up next. So thank you very much for watching. I'm Mike Partika. Please do subscribe if you hadn't already, and I will talk to you later.